What's going on, guys? Thanks for checking out another Eastern Current podcast. I couldn't remember if this was one of our new Patreon exclusive podcasts that we've been doing, or if it was just a podcast when I started it. But with that being said, if you want, I know we haven't been getting out a podcast every week here on the public platform. It's not, I don't want to be doing that. I want to be getting out a podcast every week, but transitioning to duck season, Mike's been on a 18-day road trip. Cameron and Jeff have been busy. And it's just been a tough time of year. I know I keep saying that over and over again, but as we get into the winter, we're going to have a lot more time to do podcasts, so we're going to be putting out a lot. But we are putting out a new podcast every single week on Patreon. You can go subscribe and help us out there. We're doing, full-length podcast episodes over there. So definitely go check that out. The link to our Patreon page will be in the show notes on any of the podcast platforms, as well as in the description here on the YouTube video. So go check that out. If you have always just listened to our podcast, audio style, old school, I guess, radio style, come check out our YouTube page because we've got a bunch of other content on there that on the water stuff, some hunting stuff, fishing stuff, a lot of stuff that you can't just listen to. You got to watch the video. So that's my little plug. We're going to get into talking about trout fishing, the fall grind, chasing that old speckled fang-tooth snaggle buck. Snaggle buck is definitely not a word for a trout, a term for a trout. Snaggletooth, fang fever.
Yeah.
What's another good trout saying?
I think you've covered just about
fang
everything.
fever, DOA thumper,
Yellowmouth.
The old speckled trout, the old spotted sea trout, I'm just kidding. I'm done. We're just gonna kind of talk a lot about what we've been doing lately, fishing wise, and what's been working, and share that with y'all. I've got some stuff I want to bring home about the DOA that I've kind of learned a little bit more this year of how its beauty and how you can, not even with the DOA, just the fishing technique that I haven't really done much of that has helped me out a lot lately. So we'll get into that. But Mike, how was your road trip?
It was good.
18 days.
Yep. Well, 21 days. So the first 2-3 days was we drove to Virginia for a friend of ours' wedding. Was there for 2 days.
How was old Troy?
Troy was good. It was good to see him. We didn't get to see him very much because everything with the wedding. But
weddings are busy times.
Yeah, wedding was awesome. Reception was good. So had a lot of fun. Got to see some friends that we haven't seen in a long time. So that was nice.
I had to miss that wedding, but they picked a bad weekend where I had another wedding. It was Hannah's best friends to go to. So Troy, I know you don't listen to this, but I'm sorry I didn't make it to your wedding. I need to probably text you and say that. But yeah, then you went out to Montana, then to New Mexico, then to that's cool.
Montana,
visiting some family.
See my aunt and uncle. So 4 days out there. We to drive out there. 3 days with them. Got to do a little fishing and on the Madison up there. So that was fun.
Where's the tackle shop? That's a new hat of yours.
Yep, this is actually in Ennis.
Is in Ennis? Okay,
yep.
Sweet.
So
in Ennis.
Yeah.
In Ennis. It's funny to say. Ennis.
But yeah, no, got to talking to the guy up there. I bet y'all would have been good friends. He does sled dog tours on the glaciers during the summer. And then
that's cool.
Comes back and works at the fly shops and guides there in Ennis on the Madison and some of the other rivers.
Yeah, because the Madison doesn't really lock up in the winter if you're up near the dam, right?
Yeah, so the lower part around town, right in Ennis, will lock up some, but yeah, most of the farther north stuff around the lakes and all.
It stays open.
Will stay open.
Sweet.
So yeah, we got up there, got on a good midge hatch. So we watched.
Because it's a tailwater, right? Madison's part of it's a tailwater?
Yeah.
Because it comes out of a dam, right?
Well, it comes out of Hedgen Lake and flows through a small section, and then there was an earthquake that come down and plugged up another section of it, and that's called Earthquake Lake, and then it comes out from there.
No dams, just natural flowing.
I think Hedgen Lake has a dam, and then Earthquake Lake, once the earthquake caused a landslide, they put in one there, but
Gotcha.
It's just where they've removed more of the rubble and stuff for the water to flow.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so I guess technically tailwater in some sections, other sections not as much.
It's confusing.
Yeah.
I'd love to know what a local's answer would be if it's tailwater or not.
Yeah. So,
but in the winter, who cares if it is or not if it's open?
Yeah.
I know some people don't like tailwaters, some people do like tailwaters, but that's enough freshwater talk we're getting. Me and Mike could talk about that for days too. But you glad to be back? Glad to be done driving?
Yeah, glad to be back.
Could you be a trucker, you think?
No.
Okay.
No. It was awesome to see that much of the country because I've flown to Ennis, and we've been to Louisiana, but Utah. If you've never been to Utah, just go to Utah.
You think Utah is prettier than Montana? Have you been to the upper part of the state in Montana?
No, I haven't. So that was the thing. We did the southern part of South Dakota. We did northern part of Wyoming, and then the southern part.
Slide in towards the mic just a little bit.
And
just in case. Oh yeah, now you're loud.
Okay. So with that.
And turn your chair towards me a little bit.
With that part of the, that part of the state, it was kind of a lot of like flat prairie land is what we saw.
For sure.
But got to see some of the Black Hills, the area around Mount Rushmore. So, Utah, just how different the landscapes are.
Yeah.
Like you start in mountains, and you come out to kind of desert land. You see some more mountains, flat land, all the arches, different canyon.
Yeah, it's a cool area.
It was awesome.
That's super cool. Well, we'll get into talking about trout fishing. So while Michael was gone, I'd say we started to get a lot more migratory fish.
Yep.
And our resident fish started to kind of behave like migratory fish and get into those patterns as well. So they've been targetable in good numbers and with a lot of styles of fishing, to be had. So it's been a fun time. I've had good days from the New River all the way down to, Bald Head, Oak Island area. So
gotcha.
It's seems like 2 years ago, not last season, but the season before, was epic. Best anybody's seen it in like 20 years. Last year sucked for the most part. I mean, it was okay. We just didn't get many fish.
Yeah.
This year seems to be in the middle of those two. Maybe a little bit closer to sucking than epic, but it doesn't suck. It's good. As far as numbers of fish go.
So that may not be the best way to describe it, but...
Not sucky, but not epic.
Yeah.
Good.
So,
it's good. So one thing that I've been doing, we've just come out of multiple days of high wind. And so you get into an area and you try to fish off the bank, swinging baits and bouncing baits like you normally would, and can get away with even in like 15-mile-an-hour winds. But when it's blowing 25 plus, you get so much belly in your line that you just can't work a bait correctly. You can't feel a bite, and your bait's not getting down. You think it is, but the belly in the line is keeping it from getting down. And so I've kind of, I don't think I've developed these methods for myself. I'm sure other people do this. I'm not saying I made this up, but one thing I've really started to do a lot on those high wind days is getting on a bank that I know fish are on and sitting directly up current from them and dropping my bait back to them. And I kind of named it drop jigging. So I'll kind of, just pitch it 5 feet off the side of the boat, 10 feet off the side of the boat, and pop, and then open my spool and let that bait fall back. But keep it. I'm not letting any slack in it during that time. I'm letting it fall back tightly, but not putting any resistance on it. I'm not like throwing a big pile of slack in there and letting it fall back. And then I'll flip my bail and I'll follow it with the rod tip, and then pop, and then open my bail. So I'm still letting that bait sink and get down. And you'll get it about 15, 20 feet behind the boat. You'll kind of figure out where those fish are. And I've had days where I've caught 20 fish directly behind the boat like that. Yeah. DOA works really well. We were getting them on the trout trick doing that the other day. It's an effective way to. It's tricky. You got to get a couple fish first, and then kind of figure out, okay, this is how you do it. But you can also do that kind of same idea with a jerk bait, but you're bringing it back up current, or you can still drop it back, I guess, as well. But you got to think outside the box when it's blowing 30 and you want to go trout fish, or you have to go trout fish. Yeah. Ways that you can troll for them. I don't do much trolling for them. I just don't find it fun to troll for trout unless I'm trying to locate fish. I've probably done it 5 times ever.
Yeah.
But have you fished like that before, the drop jigging style?
So typically what I do is I try to find somewhere that I can sit with the wind and the current coming together, which isn't always an option. But
it limits your places a lot.
Yeah, it limits you that direction. But if you can find areas where you can kind of line the two up, a lot of times I'll put on like a big 1/4 ounce jig head and send it with the wind as far down current as possible. And I'll go with a heavier jig head and a little smaller bait. That way I can slow roll or work that bait up to the surface and get it up ahead of where I want to be at. And then I'll just let that rod tip kind of follow that bait and let it drop back. And then I'll reel up 2 or 3 reels, work it back to the surface and let it drop back down.
Yeah.
So essentially the same thing. It's just a different way of approaching. You're coming to the fish, I'm coming past the fish.
Yeah.
But that's about the only way that you can kind of work a bait when it's that windy. But if you do that, you can get your rod tip. When, like, the way I fish, I'll take and put my rod tip close to the water real fast and jerk it. That way it kind of comes up above them, and then I'll try to let it drop in front of them and then kind of roll down to back to where you were essentially covering the entire amount of water. But
for sure. I like that. The other thing I was doing the other day too was fishing with the DOA directly up current. So like I was fishing a washout, so where there was like a lot of current coming towards me, and I could throw out to the sides and swing it, but I was getting more bites throwing my bait, and you could have probably done it with a lot of baits, but I just a lot of times throw a DOA for trout. Yeah. And throwing it directly up current and just holding my rod tip up and slowly reeling as that bait came back to me. I'm not retrieving it with the reel. Mm-hmm. I'm just slowly keeping that line just tight enough to feel a bite, not tight enough to affect the bait. And then I'd pop, and then let it fall and slowly reel. And I had a 25-inch fish like that, fishing it straight back to the boat right in front of me. So it's an effective method. If
you're new into this, I know this sounds weird, go watch some of the freshwater guys, some of the bass fishing guys that, fish kind of a lot of these same like windy scenarios in some places, and just watch their rod tips, watch their line. Those guys have the knack for watching their line and seeing just the slightest movement in it, and they're like, there's a fish, and a lot of times you're not able to feel it. You're not seeing the rod tip. You're seeing that little bit of line right where it goes into the water move or change or something different.
Yeah, something unnatural.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to learn, but it is something that if you put the time into it, it will make your fishing from here to here real fast.
Especially in those windy scenarios.
Yeah, when you can accomplish that.
Yeah, I mean, they're fishing freaking insanely light stuff in wind and just watching their line. They're never going to feel a bite all day, and they might go catch 50 bass. Yeah. So there's a lot to learn from those old guys there. They're not all old. Most of them are young now, actually.
A lot of them are our age doing it.
I know. We chose the wrong profession. Guiding, taking other people fishing instead of making money fishing yourself. But I love guiding. Don't get me wrong. But I would also love to be paid to go fish for myself. Maybe one day. If this podcast takes off. Yeah. But yeah. So both those methods, or all three of those methods, can be done with any bait. My take on fishing, just a lot of times with trout, it seems like the lightest bait you can get away with, lightest bait you can achieve what you want to achieve presentation wise is what you're going to do those bites on. Yeah. So it can be really. So many trout baits, like you want to feel that bait so much because you don't know if the fish are there. You're trying to like fish it through an area, but especially in wind, but also not in wind. Like trout fishing can take like a lot of concentration and focus on your cast and your retrieve, and like it can be one of those things that sometimes maybe don't talk for a little bit and just really focus on your cast. Like especially if your buddy beside you is catching them and you're not catching them, and you're fishing the same thing. Really pay attention to what he's doing and what you're doing and what's different, and really focus on that cast. Like the other day when it was really windy, it started to die off a little bit, and we could kind of sit off the bank and throw to it. I couldn't feel the bites at all. I was having to watch the line. I could feel the bites once the wind died off a little bit more, but at first I was really having to watch that line to know that I didn't have too much belly and to know that the bait was getting down. I couldn't just I really had to focus on it. If I started talking, I wouldn't get bit. Every cast that I didn't talk, threw it out there, watched the line, focused, I was getting a bite on. So was my client. We were both able to kind of figure that out, but we had to focus so much on that cast. But it's rewarding when you really kind of pay attention to what's going on and focus and make happen what needs to happen. Yeah. So.
Well, I'd say this time of year for trout fishing, especially when they're starting to show up, some days they're on and it's just silly. Some days they're there, but they're there. They take a certain, like you said, either it's a very light eat, it can be a short strike. It feels like, you bump the bottom, but it's them coming up and smacking the tail. They're going to tell you what you need to know, and then you've got to kind of be able to adjust from there. Yeah. So, but this is a time of year where you may have to go sit in a spot for 30 minutes and break it down if you have confidence in that spot.
Yeah.
You know, don't go out, give it 5 casts and move, especially on high wind days or heavy current days, whatever it is, because you may just not have gotten your bait exactly where you needed it to be at.
For sure.
You know, make multiple casts, change out weight sometimes if it's heavier current, and make sure that you're getting down all the way to the bottom. And, you know, really focus in on every little detail.
Trout are fish that can you really benefit from by really focusing and finding out exactly what they want.
Yeah.
I've sat in a spot before for 10-15 minutes, which I usually don't do often if I'm not getting bit, but I know they're here. And finally figured out the right bait or the right angle. Maybe it was just moving up the bank a little bit further, so one of my casts was a little bit further behind me. I had a little swing in it at that point. Little things like that can definitely determine whether you're going to get bit in a spot or not. Mm-hmm. So especially if you get like 2 or 3 bites real quick and then it stops, you're like, all right, I know there's some more fish here than that. I figure out how they want it. So
yeah, I mean, that was, you know, right before I left, I felt like I kind of hit that little bit of transition period. I was fishing a lot down in the river, and the trout are there and they're starting to move into their fall pattern spots, but I would go up to an area, I would get hit real quick and pick up 1 or 2. And then it'd be like me and my clients, we just couldn't get anything. And I'm like, guys, do you mind if I fish a minute? They're like, no. So, you know, I'd pick up a rod, I would make a couple casts, I'd swing the boat, reposition 10 feet, make a couple casts, we'd pick up some more fish. Reposition or slide back, slide over, and just finding that right current seam and the right angle.
For sure.
That was where the math finally added up to start finding them.
Definitely.
So,
that's what's so fun about them is that puzzle that's ever changing. Yeah. So, what are some of your go-to trout baits right now this time of year?
Ooh, so the other day, talking about short strikes, thinking we were, you know, hitting the bottom, that kind of stuff. My guys were like, man, I feel like I'm just keep bumping oysters. So I picked up one of their baits, and it was like bam, bam, bam. But they were coming up and grabbing the tail. So, you know, right now, this time of year, I'm moving down to like a 3-inch Z-Man, paddler Z's, whatever. That smaller bait that still has a lot more action, and I'm stepping down my jig head size to 8 3/16, just something to get that bait to fall real slow in that water column.
Yeah.
Depending on current, you know, some of my current is pretty heavy. I'll step up to a 3/16 or even a quarter, even with the smaller baits, but that's kind of more of a specialized scenario. But 8 and 3/16, with that is kind of, I feel like my more go-to.
Yeah.
Right now, sure. I know for you. It's gonna be DOA.
Well, of course, I always fish the DOA a bunch, but the trout trick I've done really well on this year. I didn't fish a trout trick much last year.
Last year did not. So not last year, but the year before, I went between the paddler Z and the trout trick, and it was like, you know, one spot would be on fire for one, the next spot on fire for the other. Last year, I think I caught 3 trout on a trout trick.
Yeah.
It was
and you got to throw it, too. I always remind myself that. It's like, all right, I hate on a bait. I didn't catch anything on that last year. I'm like, okay, I threw it a couple times, bad taste in my mouth, hung it up. But trout trick's a good bait. I know a lot of people fish other, you know, soft plastic worms, bass worms, and stuff like that. Those trout definitely like eating those small little sand eels and little, like if you go out and gig at night and you see all those little snakes, like I've cut trout open and had those little sea snakes, I don't even know what you want to call them, in their stomachs. So
yeah,
those long skinny profile baits definitely get bit by trout. And another big thing with trout is like you can fish much larger baits than you think. I mean, if you're getting short strike, for sure, smaller baits, but you'll catch 14-inch trout on 7-inch swim baits. Like they'll eat really, really big baits. They're aggressive fish, and especially now, like they're trying to pile it on. They're about to go into hibernation mode for the winter. They want to get as much food in their belly as they can. So
yeah, well, and that's, you know, one of the things too, like, you know, anytime I have people on the boat, I'll have like one person with a big bait, one person with a small bait, and you kind of figure out like which one they want. So don't be afraid, you know, start with that bigger bait, cover water, because those fish are they're still looking, like you said, to put on weight for the winter.
For sure.
So they're gonna eat it, but once you catch a few, if they turn off of it, that might be when you have to start dialing back a little bit, getting a little bit more technical with them. For sure.
Yeah, there's so much to it, and that's what's so fun about it. But I love throwing a topwater this time of year, though, for sure. Like, I'm not gonna throw a topwater all day, but I will throw it throughout the day, not just morning and evening. But it's a great bait for this time of year, especially, in those low light scenarios, early morning or overcast or in the evening. And a lot of times your bigger trout come and on a topwater. And the other thing to think about too is like, you really want to think about weather patterns right now. Like what that weather's doing is going to dictate what you're going to catch those trout on. If you're on a warming pattern where it's been cool and that water gets back up to like 60, 61, 62, throw a topwater in the mornings and evenings. Yeah. Those fish will look up and they'll smoke it for sure. Jerk baits, fish a lot of jerk baits, a lot of mirror lures, heavy. I like the heavy Dean in current. I like the MR17 if I'm not in current. Yeah. I don't fish any of the bigger. I have a bunch of the bigger profile mirror lure baits. Maybe the catch 5. What is it? Catch 2000 or catch 5000? Catch 2000. I think.
Catch 2000. Yeah.
I fish the catch 2000 some. That's a great bait for in the surf or just kind of swinging in some current. It's a little bit heavier. But yeah, I don't know. I would say my favorite bait is a DOA for sure, but it's just because I pick that up and throw it way more than I pick anything else up and throw it, and it catches fish.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and that's one of those things where like I feel like that's a confident search bait for you. Yeah. So like
I really feel that if there's fish there that might eat something, they'll eat that.
Yeah.
So, have you messed around with many other colors in the DOA?
No, I've done some stuff with like the chartreuse shell, especially like in the trout tricks, like shrimp po' boy and some of that. And I mean I catch fish on them, but I feel like the red flake for the DOA is just kind of the gold standard. That's per se.
Gold standard for sure.
But once you get into like this is something that I haven't done a whole lot of is like expand my color range. But right before I left, like I picked up I fish mood ring and like the trout tricks, but I've never picked it up for like a paddler Z or some kind of bait fish profile. Right. Like I went and they didn't have a whole lot, and I'm like, this is a good time. And I just got one of every color on the shelf, and it was like 6 different colors. I put on purple the other day, caught fish. Yeah. So
99% presentation most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. But there are going to be days where they're going to start looking for different colors or slightly different pattern. Yeah. And, having that in your arsenal is going to be the ticket.
For sure.
So
yeah, there's 2 mindsets trout fishing. And I think that there's not one right one. And I think as a single person, you should play both sides of the fence. Or I don't even know if that's a saying, but you should try both. Yeah. Sometimes just sticking with one bait that you're really confident in and finding those areas the fish are going to eat it. Mm-hmm. Other times switching a lot of baits up and figuring out what bait's going to be the ticket. So I would say more times than not, I put on the DOA and I stick with that until I find the fish that will eat the DOA. And usually it's all the fish that I find will eat it. But who knows? Maybe there's times where I've put that thing through multiple fish. I will see times when I'm seeing them blow up a bunch of mullet trout that I don't have as much luck on the DOA.
Yeah. And I think that's just what they're keyed into.
And also I think it has to do with where they're sitting in the water column. Like they're sitting higher in the water column to eat the mullet. My DOA shrimp's going underneath them. So.
Yeah. Well, and that was going to be something else I was going to say. Like you were talking about fishing in topwater. Topwater to me is deeper water, like 5 or more plus feet of water is where I'm going to focus with the topwater. Don't get me wrong. They're going to eat it in 2 or 3 feet of water. But typically I feel like if the trout are... It's kind of more rare, I feel like, that the trout are sitting that shallow. So like topwater, they will eat it there, but I feel like most of my topwater eats come from 5 plus feet of water, where they can have that time to sit underneath it, look at it, come over them, and then ambush it.
Yeah, for sure.
So picking the bait to where you're fishing, I think has a lot to do with it too.
Definitely.
Making sure that presentation is right for them.
Making sure the color's right, especially in the topwaters when they're going to see it from that depth. Make sure the movement is correct. Yep. Is a lot of it, for sure. So what are some of the areas like this time of year you're looking at fish? Because to me, it's like a lot of fish still in those early patterns where they're you're catching them around the inlets, but they're starting to be fish and they're not their winter holes, but like areas near their winter holes for sure.
Yeah, they're in that kind of transition state. I'm looking for a lot of current flow and deeper water. That's kind of my main 2 go-tos. It doesn't matter where I'm at. That like those 2 things. Typically, if you've got heavy current and you've got a deeper water, there's some kind of
or a drop off.
There's going to be some kind of structure there, whether it's a giant sand ledge in a creek, an oyster bar down in the river somewhere, whatever. there's going to be some kind of little piece of structure that they're going to sit on. And I'm targeting the whole thing because it depends on kind of the tide and which way the current's going to how they relate to that piece of structure. So don't just go fish, if there's a ledge in a creek where it goes from 3 feet to 8 feet. Don't go just fish that. Fish that plus, everything behind it.
Right.
Because depending on how that water is coming across and how the current's moving, may position those fish farther back one day. May fish, they may be closer, tighter to it another or different in the tide cycle.
Yeah, and you'll see current seams and breaks and stuff on the surface, but there's also current seams and breaks underwater that you don't see.
Yeah.
Little areas that are, fish will hold that you can't see on the surface. So that's definitely really important. And one thing that I always like to share with people, like Mike said, is like same thing with like a bank. Like if you pull up to a bank, if there's no other boats on it, trout fishing, a lot of times more boats will fish closer to each other than redfish.
Yeah.
But if you've got a couple 100 yards of bank or 100 yards of bank, hit a section for 5 minutes, then kill the trolling motor or pull the anchor up, drift back 30, 40 feet, stop again, fish that.
Yeah.
2 days ago, we caught fish on a couple different banks, and it was never on the first spot I pulled up to. We drop a couple times and finally find where they're sitting and get kind of stationed right, and start catching them that way. So
yeah,
it's important to be mobile within a spot.
Yeah.
So
and I would say, and that just comes down to I will say this time of year, if it's low tide and you're kind of struggling on finding fish, take the time, right around, go see what's on the banks, go see what you can see in the water. The water's cleaning up right now. It's getting colder. Sediment's dropping out. It's getting more oxygenated. Take that time where we have better visibility. Go ride some of those areas on your boat. Look over the side. See what's there. And mentally get a map and a layout of what, those areas look like so that when you come back, all right, this reed or, there's this amount of oysters sticking out right here. I want to be 10, 15 feet off of this or whatever, really pick those places apart.
For sure.
And that's going to make you the next level trout fisherman from wherever you're at right now.
Yeah, I feel like that's what so many people struggle with is they just go hit, 5 spots, but just hit that one little section of a spot.
Yeah.
Trout are in so many areas. There's so many spots that I bet 50 trout hold at all fall that never get hit. You know what I mean? Because and me saying 50 trout, I mean there's probably good numbers of trout on a spot that doesn't really get trout fished.
Mm-hmm.
Because they'll just find a good piece of current where bait's flowing across it and they'll sit there. The amount of times I've been surprised by trout, it's way more than redfish. Like usually redfish, I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense you're here. Like I'm looking for them in a spot, but trout sometimes it's like, okay, weird. That's weird that I caught a fish tail. I'm gonna sit here and try to fit, and then it's like, bam, there's another one. And you kind of figure out, okay, well, I see how the current's pulling off this oyster bar. Yeah. And there's kind of some bait back in this eddy, and there's another current coming off this creek, and they're kind of hanging out in that tail out between the two currents. Like, it's. I mean, honestly, it'd be cool to just go put the boat in the water and go hit a bunch of stuff that you've never fished before, and that doesn't look. I don't know. This is probably dumb. That doesn't look fishy, and see if you catch trout. But that's what's so great about trout is there's so many places to catch them and so many ways to catch them.
And too, I mean, I think this was the thing for me is I'm really bank oriented a lot of times, especially, guiding. It gives your client somewhere to cast. Right. It's a mental note to help them cast. Whenever you pull up and it's just a wide open area and you're cast at 12 o'clock or off the bow, they're like, you want me over here, over there, and it's it's not a bad thing. It's just, you already know how to break it down and that kind of stuff. Pull yourself off the bank, look at the water in a different way, and fish a larger section around what you normally would fish. And it's, it's going to open you up to where those fish are sitting in a different locations.
Definitely.
So,
yeah, that's one thing that when I guided in Louisiana taught me a lot is because those big fish down there, they're usually not on the bank.
Yeah.
But then you start fishing off the bank, and then you start to realize how many other fish are orienting on offshore structure or secondary ledges or underwater points and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you start to, it just opens your eyes to so much more. The fish aren't just orienting to stuff that I can see that's also sticking out of the water. There's so much going on underwater, which you already have that mindset offshore, but inshore you just start to think about all right, what's coming out of the water? Where's that structure?
95% of the other people in the water have that same mindset and are hitting the same thing. So to increase your chances, even if you only hit 3 other pieces of water that everybody else can't see, those are probably spots that get fished 5% of the time, if that, whether it's luck of the draw by somebody or somebody else that knows that that's there.
Yeah. Like that point on that island that you were catching fish on. Like I always catch them along the bank on that point, but you were catching them like 50 yards off the point further out into the open. Those fish were, when I'm there at low tide, there's all these rolling oyster humps in there, and so those fish are sitting down in those little troughs and just coming up and eating bait that's coming over top of them. So it totally makes sense. But when you're not looking at that at a higher tide, you're not thinking about that always. I mean, there's a lot of spots where I'm sure listeners do, and where you and I think about that, but it's way easier to overthink, like look over and not actually play into your fishing when that tide's too high over it. So come on. Nope, the awkward silence. 5-minute awkward silence here. So trout tricks, DOA shrimp. If you were going to tell someone, if someone's like, hey, I want to go fill a tackle box up with baits for trout season, let's both put 5 baits in it. 5 different baits. It doesn't have to be your 5 favorite baits. So just you say 5, or you say 1, I'll say 1. We'll go back and forth.
I think
say why you like it.
One thing that's way overlooked is jerk baits.
Yeah.
I know I'm terrible about it because I don't pick them up until it's striper season in December, January, February. And then I'll go out and I catch trout on it. And I'm like, why haven't I had you on for the last 2 months?
Right.
So jerk baits, I think, whether it's suspending, floating, that's the one difference I feel like that I have. For striper season, I'm always fishing a floating jerkbait. Just that way I can rip it and hit it into a stump, and if it gets kind of hung up, give it a little slack, and most of the time they'll float up and around it. But, having some floating, having some suspending or slow sinking ones, I think are, those are really key for a lot of the trout fishing, because you're covering, either structure that's 5-6 feet down, you want to be in that 3 to 4 foot zone, or even deeper, and being able to work it slow. Just get that little flash, twitch, let it pause, and it just kind of sit there, slowly sink in the current.
Yep. I
mean, it can be deadly.
So mine would be a mirror lure, MR17 and a heavy Dean, and that's going to depend on your current flow. If you're heavier current, fishing the heavier bait, lighter current, fishing the lighter bait, no current, fishing the lighter bait, the 17 as opposed to the heavy. Just a great bait. I don't fish it enough, but the heavy Dean has a lot of times when the DOA is crushing it, like that, you put on a heavy Dean and find the right color, it crushes it too. Like in that, when you're catching them in fast current on a DOA, you'll catch them on a heavy Dean and fast current as well. And sometimes they eat that heavy Dean even harder than they eat a DOA. So,
next up for me is going to be the Senate Z-Mans actually.
Especially
slow when we get late into the winter. I feel like that's a killer bait for me.
Heck yeah.
So,
any specific profile?
No, I feel like the scented ones don't come in like your standard. I mean, they do have some of the standard ones, but to get the colors that I want, a lot of times, I'm not a big fan of like the pogie style or whatever they're called, where they're kind of that round, taller profile. I feel like they fall flat on their side. They just don't swim the way I want them to. Maybe I'm not rigging them right, but the longer ones, I don't even know, but they're kind of like jointed.
Yeah, the paddler.
They're not paddlers.
It's the scented
jerk shads or something like that. I will fish that.
So. It's a longer, skinny profile. Mm-hmm. It's like it looks like a stretched out swimming trout trick.
Yeah,
but it's like articulated in a sense.
Yep.
Next one, topwater. Take your choice. There's so many great topwaters out there, but I've been fishing the Berkeley topwaters, their saltwater edition stuff, the J Walker 100, the 120, or the 110, and really liking those baits a lot.
Yeah.
Good pitch, really good walk on them. So
I would say, that's the thing with trout. Like, one day it can be one knocker is the best, and then the next day, it can be the little higher pitch, multiple BB rattle kind of deal. Right. It just have a few things in your arsenal to be able to try. For sure. So next for me would be just slow rolling a swim bait.
just like a 4-inch diesel minnow on a. When I'm slow rolling a bait mid water column, I don't like the Texas eye. I like that exposed hook, sawfish or redfish eye, 3/16 or step down that size a little bit if there's not too much current. Yeah. Just trying to ride that mid-water column or lower water column on a slow retrieve. And a lot of times no twitching even. I don't think twitching necessarily hurts, but just throwing it out there, letting it sink to the bottom, then like getting into a couple foot off the bottom and just slowly reeling it back in.
They can't see how slow that is.
Oh, sorry. Slowly reeling it in.
And when we say slow, I mean, it's like...
1/1000. 1/1000.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
And that is one rotation, 1/1000.
Painstakingly slow some days during the winter, but it will get bit.
It will get bit for sure. Slow rolled diesel minnow is pretty deadly.
Mm-hmm. See, is that 5?
That's give me one more.
Ooh.
You got one more? Trout trick?
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, trout trick. I think for trout trick for me is the versatility of it.
Yeah.
Because it comes in like a standard 5-6 inch, whatever. But there's times where I get a little farther into the winter, or they want a little different profile. I love just being able to cut the head off, cut a 1/2 inch off. Especially when they're really feeding on a trout trick. You can make one of those things last. I mean, they already last forever because it's Z-Man, plastic. Right. But once the head starts coming off, cut it down a 1/2 inch, you can roll again,
Heck yeah.
So Z-Man trout tricks are awesome for that.
Remember, this just for some reason just reminded me of that time we were up fishing the Pamlico Sound. And we got around those old dock pilings and we're just smashing the redfish. And they were eating any white soft plastic. Like we weren't catching on anything, but it had to be white. And then we didn't have white baits anymore because they were so torn up. So we were putting on just chunks of white soft plastic and bouncing on a jig head. And we were calling it white trash. When we were getting bit, we were like, "Give me some white trash! Give me some white trash! Get it out there."
God, that was a blast.
That just shows sometimes they can get so keyed in on a color, just like movement that stands out in that stained water, that white. Then that was redfish, but that just reminded me of that story. That was funny.
We caught trout and everything on that trip.
That's true.
Like, it was, but that white color.
Bay River, right?
Yeah,
that was a
Bay
fun
River
trip.
out of Oriental.
That was a cool trip, man. We caught a bunch of nice trout. The trout, I still swear the best tasting fish I've ever had were those 2 trout. We've had no seasoning, nothing, just some tinfoil, and we put them in a fire and cooked them. And those were freaking good. No fork. We were like eating them like caveman style.
So for those of y'all that don't know me and Jud super well, we in college we probably fished more than we went to class, and we would just get these wild hares to go take trips sometimes. So whether that was to the Pamlico, we've been to the Keys, we've been to Louisiana together, but every trip we never planned very well.
No,
we just went and
just threw a bunch of stuff in the truck and slept in the back of the truck or camped beside it.
Yeah, whatever happened. So we have some great travel stories.
Yeah, and we did so much of it, and a lot of North Carolina stuff, going up the mountains for the weekend too, and they'll just like pop in like a memory that I haven't thought about since it happened. I'm like, holy crap, I forgot about that. Which is what that white trash thing. We for probably 3 or 4 weeks we were just like saying white trash.
Then we come back down here and we couldn't catch a single fish on white trash, but it was still fun.
We were taking perfectly good gulps and cutting them in half and fishing them. I gotta fish the white trash. That's awesome. That's awesome. That reminds me of the time when Todd Jordan used to always say getting some play. Remember that?
Yeah.
He'd be getting a bite, or a fish would wake up on his topwater plug and I'm like, getting some play. I'm getting some play. Oh man. Well guys, we hope that y'all's trout season is good. We're gonna do another trout podcast next week. I'm going to bring Captain Ozzy on from the New River, North Topsail area. Talk about some trout fishing with him. And we're looking forward to that. But tight lines, my friends. And we'll see you next week. Later.